Hey guys, welcome back to another Vanguard video. Today we're here talking about the brand new Drajeweled and Rezael cards. Not actually too much to talk about. As usual, I always say these cards are straightforward, but these cards are actually straightforward this time. So we have Wings of Lifebrook Soel. So this is the new triple, the basically evolved starter version that we saw Akina use. So continuous Vanguard circle. If you have a grade 3 greater Vanguard with Rezael on this card name, this unit gets plus 5k, also active during your opponent's turn if it's somehow in the front row. Also really nice that it does get that plus 5 kind of like dog when you're still in grade 3. Doesn't have to check your opponent's grade at all. Then auto regard circle. When this unit boosts a grade 3 greater Vanguard with Rezael in its card name, you may countercharge 1. If you did at the end of the turn, put this unit into your soul. So countercharge 1 and extra soul. Amazing card just off that. Then auto regard circle or in soul. When your Vanguard with Rezael in its card name is attacked, you cost bind this card. Choose one of the units being attacked and it gets power plus 5 until end of battle. If your bind zone has 2 or more other cards with the same name as this card in your bind zone, it gets an additional plus 5 until end of battle. So basically if you already had 2 of them in there. So really interesting card. Obviously getting countercharge in soul is amazing. It being a 13k booster is amazing. You kind of didn't want to play Aerial Sage if you were already playing Gregion, but this is basically the Gregion replacement because it is just better. So really happy to get this. Also the extra bind is great because if you do play this, you don't even necessarily need to play Hostage, but if you do get 2 cards into bind, you can use the OG Amorta to have an extra PG in your deck. So I'm not sure if Rezael exactly has a space for this. I think you could necessarily fit it if you are playing Nebula Knight order, but I think in English that's basically a Valtrosa slot or whatever Keter pile you do want to be playing. So I think the deck right now kind of wants to play very kind of late gamey grind, and you do still want PGs. I think you do have space for OG Amorta, basically to have 6 or more PGs. So I think the potential for soul is there, and obviously having more soul and countercharge is really nice. And there's a lot of soul fishing and control in this deck that we basically got as support, which I think is really, really neat. It kind of puts the deck in a new direction. So I think Hostage could be back. Don't necessarily think you will play it because it's pretty easy to get bind between this and Cerberus. Cerberus, when called off Vanguard's ability, will basically bind itself as well. So you can basically, when you're being attacked for a battle, bind it, give yourself that plus 5, then have Amorta set up for an attack. Let's say like if your opponent's attacking with Drajewel to a crit, to then PG that. And Amorta also does get around guard restricts because it is a grade 3, unless you're fighting like Quenlu or something very specific that does stop that. But usually the guard restrict with Amorta is that it's not a Sentinel specific, but it is still basically acting like a Sentinel to completely protect your Vanguard. But yeah, that is pretty much me yapping about Soul's application. Amazing card, honestly. 13k booster, gets you Soul, gets you countercharge, builds up your bind with Cerberus and other cards, and really just kind of upgrades the game plan of the deck. And of course, the extra 5 shield does matter. Times where you're 5k short on shield, this will just save you. And you do have cards that can put it from Soul into, from drop back into Soul, and it'll basically be a reoccurring 5k shield. If you can get it out of bind, put it back to deck and shove it back in. But yeah, most of the time it is just for that bind buildup, and of course you get that extra power when you have 2 in bind. So next card is Driveout Dragon, a double rare. Pretty interesting card, I would say. So continuous, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Rezael in its card name, it gets all the following. So continuous Regard Circle during your turn, it gets plus 5k. If it was placed on Regard Circle from drop by your Vanguard's ability, it gets an additional plus 5. Then auto Regard Circle, at the end of the battle that this unit attacked, you cost energy boss 3, put this unit into your soul. You choose a faded one of Miracle's Rezael, so the OG Rezael, from your soul or drop, put it into your hand. If you put it from your soul, you may soul charge 1. So very interesting card, essentially reusing not necessarily your persona rides, because you can't actually grab King. Unfortunately, King doesn't have the continuous text that it's regarded as Rezael for the fight. It's only continuous Vanguard Circle, so it's not like the dress ups where it is regarded as Faded 1 Rezael everywhere. So unfortunately, you can't infinitely loop King persona rides, but you can basically loop OG persona rides, and of course that will always be, of course, your King fodder for the shove-in. Your soul, plus 5k to all your rears, and get an extra, body on your board, basically making a column usually for Rifistor, and then you have Gab or whatever else in the other column. So pretty interesting card. Also nice that it refuels your soul as well. And of course, being able to grab Rezael is really, really nice because you already had so much filter between Rifistor and, Kadawala you were playing before, but Rifistor basically takes that slot now. So really, really nice that you are basically just getting infinite, not persona fodder, but, shove the soul fodder for King that is basically going to be setting up all your turns. And if you have to, you can persona ride OG Rezael on top of King if you are in situations where you really feel like you need persona ride. At worst, if you're at 5 damage, you just swing OG Rezael, call Gab or Fistar, and you hope that's enough to basically end the game. So Still pretty interesting card. I don't think you're necessarily going to be playing this too much over Impervious Dragon, because Impervious Dragon is still 15k shield, and he actually does get that plus 5k early, unlike this card, which only really gains the effects once you're hitting the grade 3 or greater, Rezael. So I think Impervious still has slots in the deck. You probably want to play maybe 2 of this. I think your space is really tight in Rezael, but because you have, Nebula Knight Order and other cards that, call from top, you can kind of afford 1 to 2 ups in Rezael right now. Or at least that's what I've seen as the pattern for JP decks, especially for people that like to play, like Ventesta or Maple and Rideline, whatever, to make space, or for those, who might not like playing the, one-off Maples, especially the grade 1 Maple. But I really think the grade 1 Maple is like amazing, whether you're playing a Rideline or main deck. But yeah, really interesting card. I think being able to give it a deck the ability to essentially grab Persona Rides is really strong. And at worst, this is just free king fodder, and then you'll fish for king off Refister's CB1, check top 7 ability. So another really cool card is Knight of Ascendancy Sigeric. So when it's placed on Vanguard circle by the ability of your grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Rezael, you choose a card from your drop and you may put into your soul. So kind of a way to loop soul back if you do get it from bind or into drop. But if you are, binding it from soul, then you are getting the extra shield. So it's a little bit weird, but nice that you kind of get like potential in the future for soul refreshing essentially from drop. But it has to be placed by Rezael scale, so you can't do this during main phase. And of course, Rezael is usually just better at calling to rearguard circle, and then, doing something with the rear during battle phase, or, hostaging the next turn. Another interesting grade 2 here is a comment. We have Knight of Inviolableness, Eliseg. So auto rearguard circle at the end of the battle, this unit attacks. If you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Rezael on its card name, you can cost Soul Blast 1, retire this unit. So very similar to Cadwalla's cost, essentially the same. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 card with Rezael from on them, reveal it, put in your hand, and shuffle your deck. So kind of like a budget Cadwalla, but arguably Cadwalla is better because it can grab any grade 2 or greater, or if you whiff, you can draw 1. So honestly, I don't think you're playing this card because Refister is already doing that. If you did already have to burn that CB early and you were desperate to find Rezael, check top 7 better than top 5, and Refister also does something for whiffing. This card does not do that, unfortunately, but really interesting that they basically printed a Cadwalla clone that's like an alternative if you wanted extra Rezael soul fishing. If you wanted a build that basically just really focuses on finding those Rezaels and looping them, which I think is kind of an interesting mechanic with the new dragon. But yeah, pretty much I think you're going to be playing a few of that new double rare. You do want to still loop your kings, or not your kings, your OG Rezaels for king skill, which I think is very useful. So I think the deck will probably want to play 2, maybe 3 of the new double rare. Definitely 4 souls. Soul is just too good of a card. You might maybe have to cut it to 3, but like you really want to see that extra effect if it comes up. Again, you could also be playing Amorta, try to fit those ins for the extra PG, and have a lot of bind, and service is also extra bind when you do call it off Rezael skill in order to draw 1. So I think this is a pretty big upgrade for Rezael overall. I'm not too sure if it's really going to push it into like top tier status, but it makes the deck even better than it was before. You basically have no soul, no CB problems anymore. And the deck, of course, is still very consistent like it was before. And of course, you have Nebula Knight Order. For us in English, you basically have to play, Valtrosa, or go back to, Teethfault, Wisdom, Caterpile, until we get, something that is kind of supplementing more in terms of draw 1. Of course, you still have Dissection. Dissection is still basically carrying the deck, as well as Painkiller. But yeah, that is pretty much it for Rezael. The Drajeweled cards are also pretty simple, I would say. There's just one card I want to mention it, so let's get to it next. So finally, we have the Michiru cards, which is Demonic Jewel Dragon Lavenajader, and of course that Demonic Jewel Dragon name is important because you can give the skill from Magnus to essentially do a drive check. Then it has the auto when it's discarded from hand during your turn. You choose a card from your drop and put into soul. This is really nice. This essentially, quote unquote, solves your problems of not finding a grade 3. As long as you find this, you're basically shoving anything from drop after pitched. You can put on standby, And of course, you also have the new ride line to check top 5. I do think you probably want to play the old ride line after talking to someone that plays the deck a lot, just for the aggro. But of course, you have a lot of ways to find your 3. And, if you find this and ditch it, it essentially guarantees your grade 3 for the Soul Blast return that you don't necessarily guarantee off the ride line. So honestly amazing. Also, if you have to pitch any of your other cards early, like any of your pieces such as Varpula or Letho, if you're not on Magnus, then this will also shove it to soul and basically gets you more fishing in terms of just pieces. So it's also really nice to have a grade 3 that is basically a card that can be soul blasted for Drajewel's cost, as well as also being a restander as well. And the second and third text is essentially just like Letho's text is what you can think of, minus the EV3 draw 1. So auto rearguard circle when it attacks a grade 3 greater unit, if your soul has 4 or more cards of different grades, gets plus 10 to end of turn. So that plus 10 is still restricted to your opponent being grade 3. then auto Rearguard Circle when you Soul Blast 4 more cards at the same time for the cost of your ability of your Vanguard, which is jeweled in his card name. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 greater, you cost Soul Blast 1 and stand this unit. So kind of moving Magnus into more of a ditch fodder phase. There is Fixed Airy Dragon, the basically generic from DZ-3, you know, that we saw in a lot of decks that kind of wanted the early game. We saw this as well for like the initial builds of, you know, Youthberg as well as Leo Draconis. But you know, Soul Blast 1 call on pitch is really nice. It's easy early game for Drajeweled, and in a pure Magnus build, and I think even in an Ignis build, you have more than enough Soul. You have a lot of easy check top, you know, you have beef runs, you have, you know, this getting you Soul every turn it's pitched if you pitch it early for a ride deck. So honestly, I don't think Soul's too much of an issue, and also I think this makes setting up double Quenlu, either this is in like Magnus or whatever else, really easy as well. I think with Quenlu and Magnus, for that cheese, you do have to like kind of just fish for it out of your deck, but it's not that hard, you know, when you are playing for a long game, essentially, not for a long game, when you're playing for an end game that is essentially going through your deck rapidly in terms of deck filtering, and then of course ending the game, because you're a very offensive deck, sending your opponent to 0, and of course when you have 4 more damage, you'll be doing 4 drives. So I think this card is pretty amazing. You don't always have to, of course, give this the, you know, twin drive effect. Of course, you're probably going to go that, or sorry, the single drive effect. You're probably going to give that to Geodrel so he can perform twin drive. So most of the time, you are probably still giving Geodrel the skill for that twin drive, especially if you Persona wrote on Magnus. But I do think this does look a little bit stronger in a pure Magnus build than Ignis. But I think you could still play, you know, 1 or 2 of this in Ignis, essentially replacing the 1 of Geodrel if you felt like 4 Zagon was already enough. But I mean, you know, there's so many ways already to call out of Soul, which is why I think the next card is really, really weird. So the last card to talk about is Direfull Corinna. So auto when placed on Rearguard Circle during your main phase. If your Vanguard is specifically Magnus, so it won't work once you're on Ignis, which I think is super weird, you choose up to 1 card from your Soul with a different card name from this unit with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard. Go to Rearguard Circle and then turn, put that called unit into your Soul. So essentially free call from Soul. So less reliance based on Ignis if you wanted to play a pure Magnus build. But again, if you're on any of the other Drajeweleds, this effect won't work. And the boost effect is also tied to Magnus as well. Auto Rearguard Circle when it boosts if your Vanguard is Magnus essentially. You choose up to 1 card from your drop if your Soul does not have a card with the same grade as that card, put it into your Soul. So essentially solving, as long as you pitched a grade 3, your problem of not Soul charging a grade 3. Because, you know, you boost, shove the 3 into Soul, Soul blast the 4 different grades, shut your opponent to 0, and just go crazy. And hopefully you had lethal or something set up already. But, you know, with, you know, Varpula, you do get the 5 attacks going versus Magnus. So I think Magnus will still mostly be on Ignis. Whether it's running Quenlu or not, I have no clue. But I think Magnus Ignis is still the strongest version of the build. And this is kind of pushing, as well as Lavenajader, kind of pushing people to play more of an original, just pure Magnus build instead of playing Ignis and other things. But I do think with the initial design and of how amazing just Zagon and Varpula are as cards, that you do want to just play the basically hybrid build of Magnus and Ignis, because those cards are just insane cards early game, and they also draw you so much and easily plus you a board between that and Geodrel, whether you're playing Geodrel at, you know, 2 to 3, or even if you're just playing him at 1 off Orbital or whatever, because calling Geodrel and Lavenajader could still be very, very strong. But yeah, that pretty much does it from me. I think you could consider also Fire Reckless in the deck as well, as a friend was telling me, but you know, if you're not greedy, you are probably still playing 4 in that Magnus Ignis hybrid build. But yeah, that does it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do really love that the direction that they're kind of pushing Rezael in. Magnus feels weird. I think you still definitely want to play the Ignis package, but it feels like they're trying to push a more like Magnus focused build with no other cards. Maybe someone will cook Magnus like Mask Drajeweled, I don't know, crazy stuff. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you knew of these. Do let me know what you think of these new cards, and of course like and subscribe as usual, and I'll see you in another video.